The revolt.
Just so you know, as the chaplain, I have the good book, just in case anything happens.
Call this meeting to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. As we observe a moment of silence, we remember the horrific massacre at the Texas church. Eyewitness accounts are that the shooter went after babies that were crying. There is a pure evil in the world, and thank God there's also goodness. Please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Please be seated. Remember to silence your cell phones if you have them. First item on our agenda is citizen concerns. If there are any concerns that do not appear already on the agenda, please come forward.
Mr. Chairman, board members, I just want to take a quick opportunity here to introduce to you our new conservation director. He started last Wednesday and will be working with me here the next 5.5 weeks, and then take over on after December 15th when I retire. Dan Heisel from Clay County.
Welcome.
You can question him all you want. He'll be at the department head meeting.
Very good. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Hearing no other citizen concerns, item 2 on the agenda is approval of the agenda.
I'd move approval.
I'll second the motion by Taylor. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Items 3 through 7 constitute a consent agenda of routine action items to be considered by one motion. Items pass unanimously unless a separate vote is requested by a board member. Item 3 is approval of the minutes of the October 31st meeting. Item 4 is approval of the claims. Item 5 from Board Administration includes Item A, approval of a resolution for a tax abatement for New Life in Christ Incorporated. Item B, approval of a resolution for a tax abatement for initials VP. Item C, approval of a resolution for a tax abatement for initials JC. And item D, approval of lifting of tax suspension for initials KW. Item 6 from the public bidder includes item A, approval of a notice of property sale resolution for a parcel also known as 2211 and 2300 Rebecca Street, setting that for Tuesday, November 21st at 4:35 p.m. And item B, approval of a notice of a property sale resolution for a parcel also known as 2205 West 2nd Street, setting that for Tuesday, November 21st at 4:37 p.m. And item 7 from Human Resources is the approval of the Memorandum of Personnel Transactions.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
Motion by DeWitt, second by Radig. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. We'll move on to item 8, which is a 4:35 p.m. set time. This is the public hearing and sale of a property parcel ending in 1002. Public hearing is now open for anyone to speak for or against the sale of this property. That will come later.
Seeing no interest in this, let's close the public hearing and move that.
Second.
Motion by Raddick, second by Taylor to close the public hearing. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. We are now receiving bids for this property.
Now you can bid. Come up, state your name, and make a bid.
Charlene Boyer, and I believe what I've seen, the minimum bid is 123.
Correct.
That's what we would like to do.
Bid is, minimum bid is 123. Is there anyone else to bid on this property? Going once, going twice. Move to sell the property for $123 to Charlene
Boyer.
Charlene Boyer.
Second.
Second by Taylor. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item B for action is a 4:37 p.m. set time. This is the public hearing and sale of a property parcel also known as 711 Center Street. Public hearing is now open for anyone who would wish to speak for or against the sale of this property. You wish to purchase that parcel? Yes, after the public hearing.
Hearing none, Mr. Chair, I move that the public hearing be closed.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Raddick to close the public hearing. Hearing no discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Sir, thank you for your patience with our procedures. We are now receiving bids for this property, so please come forward, state your name and address, and your opening bid.
Yeah, my name's Martin Nestor. We go into the minimum. My address is 1717 Allen Street.
Minimum bid of $199
Yeah.
has been bid by Mr. Martin.
Martin Nestor.
Are there any other bids for this property?
Hearing none, Mr. Chair, I move that the property in question be sold to Mr., and I didn't catch your name.
Martin.
Martin Lester.
Esther.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by DeWitt. Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you, sir. Item 9 for action is from Mr. Ronald Pauley. This is approval of a request for installation of a culvert driveway at county's cost for Ronald Pauley.
Gentleman, Brian Vakalskis, attorney from Sioux City, here with and on behalf of Ronald Pauley, who lives at 3175 Lee Avenue in Smithland. I submitted as part of my agenda request item a letter setting forth the facts behind this agenda item, and three exhibits that were attached. Two were GIS satellite photographic imagery of the area here, and I don't know how much detail you want me to go into beyond the letter. I think I set it out fairly clearly in the letter. Essentially, we have a driveway that the county installed for Mr. Pauley, but nonetheless, the driveway is installed on Mr. Pauley's neighbor's residence due to the way that the parcels are situated there. And it's become a problem now because Mr. Pauley's neighbor has put up a fence not allowing Mr. Pauley access to his property. And so what Mr. Pauley is asking the county to do is to put in a new driveway at the county expense and a new culvert that would allow him access to the property that is shown on Exhibit B off of Kossuth Avenue. This property is next to property that he owns, not the 3175 Lee Avenue address, but nonetheless, it would allow him access to there and avoid this problem. I've been in contact with Mr. Nara. There's an email that's attached as Exhibit C to my items that I gave to the board members. And Mr. Nara advises, even though the driveway location is in the county's right-of-way, there's no power, police power or administrative power with the county to have the person move a vehicle or any other property that is in his own driveway. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me because the driveway goes to Mr. Pauley's property, but nonetheless, the driveway is on the neighbor's property. And so we're asking the county to to install a new driveway for Mr. Polly at the county's expense to avoid this problem. And they can vacate the other driveway or do whatever they want, but the driveway is essentially useless now to Mr. Polly because the access has been cut off and there's nothing the county can do about it because it's on somebody else's property.
Thank you. Mr. Polly, I assume that's a fair summation.
Yeah, I'd just like to see the county come down there and survey their right-of-ways, because I was told by Mr. Nara that their right-of-ways were more than 33.5 feet. They bought up more ground because of the drainage from that dam. I just want the county to go down there and use their survey team. I had Sunquist survey it before, just to get the boundaries to line up.
Okay. Any questions for these gentlemen from the board members at this point?
Well, I have a question on estimated cost.
Would you like, the board like to move on to Mr. Nara? Also included in the back of materials is a recommendation from County Engineer Mark Nara. He also includes the secondary road driveways and entrances policy. Mr. Nara, would you please come up and summarize the recommendation? I know it's already laid out in here.
This isn't an unusual situation where driveways are, we don't check ownership when we have a resident request driveway maintenance or an update. This driveway, when it first came to our maintenance staff's attention, water from the outlet of the dam was draining across it, made it difficult to cross. It was requested that we clean out on the northerly side of the driveway, put a tube underneath the driveway in the ditch, and allow that water to run and go through that 18-inch pipe. I believe that Mr. Polly had use of that driveway for a period of time before the neighbor sealed off that access. I don't see any value in us going out and surveying it. The fence is pretty well set where the right-of-way is. Additional right-of-way was acquired when the NRCS watershed project built that dam and impoundment area that lays to the northeast of the driveway. There's no dispute about the circumstances to date. The only question is, when we're dealing with a new driveway, who pays for it? Our policy says that the county builds the driveway, the landowner reimburses us for the price of the culvert if needed. It's my recommendation we follow that policy for this new driveway. We repaired the driveway as requested by Mr. Polly in the first place. Those requests can be made by tenants, landowners, or those with an interest in the land. Again, we don't check that. We did that as requested. For the new driveway request, that expense goes to the property owner. We've had other areas in the county where we've had driveway disputes. An owner may have had to build a new driveway because of a separation of a farmstead from the farm. Any number of reasons such as that, where access across the driveway is cut, we charge that property owner for the new driveway. I don't see this as being any different than those prior cases. As far as cost, I don't remember if it was a 36 or a 48-inch pipe that we had lined up for that location. If it's a 36, we're looking in the neighborhood of $21 a foot. I think we were looking at over 60 feet of pipe being necessary to give a 30-foot wide entrance to the farm. So we're looking in the neighborhood of $1,200, I think that comes out to be roughly. It would be 60 feet of pipe at $20 a foot, and 36-inch pipe is running just a little above 20 right now, current price.
Mr. Ragg, does that answer your question? Do you have anything else?
So would we do the work?
We typically do the work on driveways. Occasionally we'll have a private resident that will do it themselves, or if they're building a house and they have extra foundation dirt, they will do that. Sometimes they obtain the culvert through us. As long as the culvert's used in the right-of-way, we can sell it in that case. But typically we go and clean ditches or do other road work to obtain the soil from one project and bring it and use it to build the driveway. So it's kind of killing two birds with one stone. we get necessary roadside work done, and we have material generated to build the driveway. We keep dirt in stockpile as well at different locations around the county where we've cleaned dirt but it's been too wet for us to use anywhere in a roadway. We stockpile, allow it to dry, and then we have that material to draw from. So that's the foreman's call where he gets the dirt. But typically we're using dirt that isn't desired by anybody else. And you know, we keep stockpiles of that around and build driveways for other residents who need them.
Could you explain some of the thinking behind the policy, and also would granting this request open up other issues, or is it truly a single case of circumstances?
I don't know if this is a single case of circumstances. We had a driveway down on 210th Street that was shared between two residences. One residence on whom the driveway, it's a flag-shaped lot going back to the two residences, but the driveway itself runs with the far back resident. He threatened to cut off the access of his neighbor immediately to the north as the two lots lay off 210th Street. The resident in the northern lot controlled the ground out to the road. He paid for a new driveway to go in to assure that he still retained access to his property. We've had other incidences where a farm is severed from the right-of-way. The farmer assumed at the time that he sold off the home site that he'd be able to use that driveway to access adjacent fields. At some point in time, those type things break down and there's no formalized recorded easement. The property owner says, I no longer want you tearing up my driveway with your white farm equipment. You need to build another driveway. There's never been a question prior to this that that landowner would then pay for the driveway.
Mr. Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how ultimately did Mr. Polly pay for this when it wasn't on his property? Can you remind me? I may be missing that, but was this through subdivision or some other circumstance? And then do you have an equal circumstance out there where somebody's paid and then that's been shifted somehow? That's the one that sticks in my craw a little bit.
Well, one would argue that any time a driveway goes into a house lot that serves house and farm, that driveway was originally paid for by whoever had the farm, built their house, and then used that. The later subdivision comes along when they sell off the home lot and just keep the farm ground. So that would be kind of the case that I'm speaking of, where ownership of the driveway and the frontage of the driveway changes over time. In the case of this one, I don't think the discussion of who owned it ever came up. It was the way he accessed that field coming off the road. The access was continually wet because of the outlet of the dam. There's an outlet structure for that pond that lets out just across the fence and a little bit north of where the driveway is. So it was always wet for them.
But you're saying at that time, Mr. Polly paid for this?
He paid for the culvert, and we did the work to improve the driveway so that the water would go through the culvert instead of running over the top of the driveway.
But not on his property at that time?
I don't think we looked at whose property it was. It was the way he got to his field at the time. Is that fair, Ron? That was the way you got to the field at that point in time, was through that entrance?
Like 1985, that driveway, then I had an issue with the fences, so the neighbors didn't like to get a hold of township trustees, so in retaliation, they blocked me off my driveway. That's where it's all come from.
What ended up happening is they did a survey and it showed that the driveway was on their property, not Mr. Polly's, when the fence dispute came about.
That's why I didn't understand the boundaries, because you said they bought more right of way up on the southern part of that driveway because of the drainage access, right?
No, south of the driveway is where the county had more easement that was purchased, not in the driveway area itself. That area to the south of the driveway is where we're out, I think it's almost 60 feet fence.
It's more than 33 and a half.
Yeah, and the reason for that was that's what serves as the spillway of the NRCS structure. Water, in the case of an extreme storm, goes out over an emergency spillway to the east, crosses along the face of the dam and along and through Mr. Polly's property, hits that ditch and gets away. That small pipe that serves as the control structure is not satisfactory to drain the pond in the event of a large rain. Typically, ponds have an elevation control structure and an emergency spillway. The ditch was enlarged, and this all occurred long before I got here, but that ditch was enlarged to carry the water that would be coming down the emergency spillway. And it was one of many NRCS projects that were done as far as watershed enhancement in the area.
You're not interested in moving it, are you?
I'm what?
Interested in moving it, relocating it? I mean, I know that was brought up.
The 18-inch pipe wouldn't be any good farther downstream. It's too small to serve in that spillway area. So, again, that's why we had between, and I didn't dig out the old permit that was put away long enough ago, 3-4 years anyway, that it was either a 36 or a 48. I'd have to redo the drainage area to see exactly what we need. But assuming a 36, like I said, it's a little over $20 a running foot for the pipe, plus band. And it is a fairly deep ditch, as I recall. It's about 6 to 7 feet from flow line to what the driveway elevation would be at the new location. The driveway had been there historically. Now that it's on the neighbor's property, I feel like we'd have to have the neighbor's permission to take it out, because the embankment of the dam is on their property.
But technically, Mr. Polly owns the culvert.
No, Secondary Road Department owns the culvert. He reimbursed us for it. Once a driveway is installed, we maintain it forever. So if a new culvert is necessary in the course of road maintenance, if the culvert gets a hole in it, when the flow line of the culvert eventually washes or rusts out, and they typically have a life between 30 and 50 years, we replace that as we do ditch cleaning work or whatever work is in the area. We only require the property owner to pay for it once, and that's upon installation. After that, it's their driveway as long as they need it. We do contact landowners when we're doing a ditch cleaning job saying, do you still need this driveway? If they don't, we take it out. But that culvert is never owned by them. It's purchased for road purposes. This is why we don't sell them privately. Number one, we can't enter into competition with businesses that sell and charge sales tax for these things. That's why we don't sell our culverts for somebody to use back in a private waterway as a crossing. But they do reimburse us the cost of that pipe when it goes into the ditch for a driveway. We purchase every year around $75,000 to $85,000 worth of pipes for use in driveways, in crossroads, and other secondary road projects.
So you're thinking about $1,200 in materials and then whatever time, labor
and work it takes to put in the driveway. And this is a wider ditch, so it takes us more dirt, more time, more labor. It's probably a 2 to 3 day build for us by the time everything's prepped, hauled in, and built. So there's an investment for us as well there.
Was there a specific spot that we discussed putting it? If it were to be
we had a spot located that was a couple hundred feet south, back toward Old Highway 141 there that we had located. We were looking at a spot where the road elevation and the field elevation were pretty close. That's usually advantageous for a property owner when they're hauling out loads of grain or whatever, not to have to go upgrade or downgrade with a load. So we try to get as flat a spot as we can and still meet our site distance requirements.
I'm fine with that.
Fine with what?
I'm fine with spending up to $1,200 on materials. Mr. Taylor?
And then is it at the county's expense as far as time and labor of your department?
Yes, we don't charge people for our time and labor.
And it goes against policy? Is that what you said?
What's that?
The request, does it go against current policy?
It would go against current policy. A new driveway would require the property owner to pay for the pipe.
Okay. How does the board feel?
Well, I think it is kind of a unique situation, so I'm fine with breaking a policy on something like this, as long as in the future we maybe settle who owns the land before going forward with it.
So would the guidance of the board then be that only the landowner would be the one that would have the ability to sign a permit for a driveway in the future? And
Well, like
ensure that that property owner, right now we allow tenants to assign as long as they're writing the check for the culvert. We have never, typically driveways are requested by somebody with a real interest in the property, whether as a tenant or as an owner. The implication we're talking here, I think, would require that we assure that we're dealing with the owner of the property.
Well, on something like this, you're crossing Mrs. Brown's property with that driveway, and she put up a fence
And
on
that
the
is
property.
not something that we went out and ascertained. We went upon the request that we received from the individual using the driveway.
I mean,
without checking ownership.
You can pull it up on Beacon in the future, though, and you can see that it does cross that property.
I would not call Beacon necessarily accurate. If you think about it, that line is almost 4 feet wide on the surface of the earth. The lines, they're a good representation, but they aren't a survey. When the land was surveyed and showed that the driveway was not on their property, that was a little bit of a surprise to us as well as Mr. Polly. But again, it was not, we have not in the past taken it upon ourselves to assure that we're dealing with the landowner in this case when the driveway request comes in.
How many times in the history of Woodbury County has this ever happened?
I can only think of 3, but I sign off on all the driveways. I don't review them all personally. I review the ones that are the difficult cases, the ones where there's a site distance issue, or my foreman also have the authority to deal with those. We should draft new direction to the department if we're going to change the manner in which we're dealing with driveways and who has the authority to sign for it.
Well, if this is such a unique, specific kind of case that has really not happened that much, I don't know that it necessarily needs to have that entire change of policy going forward.
I guess I can't say that it doesn't happen because I know it's happened in cases where we've had the home lots separated from the farm ground, where we've had other disputes over driveway access with shared driveways as they're approved in some subdivision areas. It's to say that this won't occur again, it could happen tomorrow depending on what request we might get. Again, we have never had a policy where a landowner has a right to a driveway without paying for it at all. They have to go through the permit process and then again reimburse for the pipe if a pipe is necessary. We do build driveways without pipes in areas where that can be done. Some of the houses along Correctionville Road, for instance, don't have a ditch in front of them, they don't need a pipe.
But we did build a driveway for this individual that paid for that up front, and it's not usable by this individual.
That's not our fault. That's not the road fund's fault that he did, that we did our job, which was repair a driveway upon request of tenant, landowner, somebody who had a relationship with the land. At that point, we didn't feel it was our job to determine who has that relationship with the land beyond the fact that we had a request for an improvement in front of us. I guess that's where I feel that we'd have to have some kind of change or guidance in the policy, because I don't want to get on the hook ever again for a $1,200 pipe if it can be avoided. And to me, that puts us in a position where we're going to have to ask people, prove this is your land, and only the landowner or the person with their name on the contract has the ability to sign for it. We no longer take that from tenants and others. With absentee landowners, that could make things difficult for some driveway requests. That's why we've kept it simple. Typically, nobody wants to spend money on something that isn't theirs or that they don't have an interest in. Again, that's where this started. If you're feeling insistent that you ought to pay for it, perhaps give him a credit equal to the sum that he paid for the 18-inch pipe off of the price of the pipe that's going to be necessary at the other area. I'd rather not do that, but if we're going to be making an exception, at least that way you'd be making a contribution toward the cost of the other pipe.
Well, that would seem fair.
We might be able to go back in the record and find out what that is, or we give him credit for what the
fair market value
current, or what the current price of an 18-inch pipe is. They haven't varied a lot in this recent time period.
I would make a motion to do so, just because I do want to strike some sort of balance where we don't open up Pandora's box, but I do think that sounds like a fair and reasonable compromise.
I'm inclined to think that.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Mr. DeWitt.
I'm inclined to think that we are opening that Pandora's box, and we hired the county engineer to do his job, and I believe that his recommendation holds water. I mean, no pun intended with your culvert, but and look at further changing the policy if needed. But I mean, the engineer's got a reason for the policy, and I believe we should maintain it.
The engineer or Mr. Taylor state the motion.
I believe the motion was to request the difference or to build the driveway at the new location and give Mr. Polly credit for the value of the pipe that was installed at the driveway that is not his property toward the cost of the culvert to be installed at the new location. So if the old driveway was $350 for the pipe, we would give him a $350 credit then toward the cost of the pipe necessary for the new driveway location. That's what I understand the motion to be.
It's a long motion.
I don't know how. I guess the short way to say it would be to give him credit for the pipe he's paid for toward the price of the new pipe for the new driveway. That's a shorter way. That's what I understand of the motion. If I'm not right on that, Supervisor.
Yeah, that's it.
Mr. Nair, does your recommendation still stand with that motion?
My recommendation still stands that we charge him the full cost for the new driveway.
Did you have a comment? Anyone else have a comment?
I mean, he's the engineer. He's going to make the recommendations that make sense, with his budget and everything. Where that pipeline to the individuals affected, obviously we don't always take an engineer's recommendation as in the bridge northwest of Mobile. For something like this,
I would take this as a bit of a directive to review our policy too, because the potential for this exists to happen.
Well, it doesn't seem like it'd take that much, if it's another week of paperwork or something, or trying to find somebody to fix it from happening again.
The tenants know who they're writing their rent check to.
Sure.
So, the paperwork could be done in the electronic era. We can't deal with absentee landowners.
I'm open to reviewing the policy, but if in doubt, I feel like it's reasonable to follow policy. Any other comments? Any questions on the motion? Is it clear? Thank you. Roll call vote, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No.
Aye.
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 Nay. And the motion passes 3-2 with myself and DeWitt opposed. Item 10 is from Building Services, Director Kenny Schmitz. Includes item A for information, LEC HVAC compressor failure. Good news or bad news?
Well, it's kind of bad news. This is an information item only to let the board know that we experienced an HVAC compressor failure at the LEC. That unit is going to be replaced. We're currently going to replace that and expense that out through our law enforcement center building budget. Typically, that annual budget, the amounts we ask annually for buildings do not incorporate costs large enough to handle repair of this size. However, we are going to expense it out. There is a possibility at the end of the year that we may need to come back and do a budget amendment for that. If that's necessary, that's what we'll do. I don't know that at this point, but certainly this is the way to expense these type of items out. And so just letting you know that we incurred that cost.
Do you see other major repairs that could come upon us that are also past their normal life?
Things like this are kind of unforeseen, but yes, there are other repairs that we have and will be experiencing as we go along that just are not typically included in our annual budgets because we, as a county in the past, have not allocated funds by overinflating the budget, if you will, to carry on certain things and repair certain items. Let's say, if I had to replace a quarter of a roof or an eighth of a roof on a building, that's something that our budgets do not include currently. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying that isn't something that it shouldn't be considered. I definitely think it probably should be. So when we experience costs like this, I'll be coming to the board and letting you know that that type of situation has happened. So.
Questions? All right, thank you. Item B for action is approval of courthouse HVAC project number 1, automation controls HVAC improvements in the basement, first, second, and second and a half floors.
Yes, we've received costs for projects, HVAC projects 1 and 2 for the courthouse. Unfortunately, those projects combined exceed the amounts that we have allocated in our CIP funding for the HVAC projects at the courthouse. Exceeded it by a lot. And so we are requesting that we do move forward with the HVAC project 1. We do have funding allocations to cover that project. Again, this project is for the basement through floors 2 and a half. It would replace some much needed controls, change some systems from pneumatics to digital controls, incorporate things like variable frequency drives, which would save us some energy usage going forward, and take care of just a lot of items that we currently have no control over or are not functioning. I do have Corey with Resource Consulting Engineers here. Corey would be willing to answer any questions that you might have related to the project.
Okay. Yes.
Can you give us what the scope and cost of project number 2 was, which was, if I remember, floors 3 through 7?
8.
Yes. The scope of project number 2, the bids we received back came to $969,739.
So you're basically saying don't do it at this time?
Correct.
Okay. And you and I had a conversation a little bit about window coverings, flooring, and everything else, and how that might sink in the future with doing that, and some cost savings. Can you explain that for the good of the public and board?
Absolutely. Project 2 is a very difficult project, to say the least. It incorporates floors 3 through 8. In completing that project, we would have to move everyone off of each floor while we do the construction. Since we would be doing that at that time if we completed that project, it only makes sense to go in and take care of things like painting of walls, replacing carpet, replacing outdated and non-functioning window coverings and things like that. Those are not costs that are currently included in the bids that we received. So we would have to go back and look at project number 2, decide if we were going to do that project, if we wanted to include those items, which seems to make a lot of sense in those floors that need updating.
But in the bids received, there was cost for covering all of the floors and preserving everything that was in and around. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that that's a point to reiterate too, is that there would be a cost savings potential doing it at the same time. So.
Absolutely. Definitely would be, and that's why I would make that recommendation if we ever reach that point.
Thank you.
I think it's a solid recommendation because we don't want to do too many passes over the same area. So that's pretty obvious. We work with the bids we receive, though. Any other questions?
So all you want us to do is move on with number 1,
That's correct.
put number 2 on the back burner.
I'd move to approve the Woodbury County Courthouse HVAC Project 1 bid contracts, construction fees, and any associated standard contingency repair costs required in the amount of $735,900.
I'll second the motion by Taylor. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Item C is approval of courthouse HVAC project number 1 hearing date.
The item before you is to set a public hearing date, time, and place for the courthouse HVAC Project 1. Building Services request setting such time for November 13th, 2017 at 4:45 p.m. in the Woodbury County Courthouse Board of Supervisors meeting room.
I'd move to set the Woodbury County Courthouse HVAC Project number 1 public hearing date for November 13th at 4:45 p.m.
Second.
Motion by Taylor, second by Radig. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 11 for action is from Juvenile Detention. Please welcome Director Ryan Weber for his inaugural agenda item before the board. This is approval of the contract.
You can call me Councilman Weber.
Oh, congratulations.
Almost close here, but.
Okay.
What I got before you here is just a contract drafted by PJ and Associates there between Omaha Nation and Woodbury County Detention Center. Contract is already signed by representative councilmen from the Omaha tribe of Nebraska. I like these contracts between us and these smaller communities that don't, smaller counties and the tribes that don't have their own detention centers, to say this is a one step here in us becoming really the tri-state detention facility for the future. So this contract is the same that we provide all the out-of-county kids. It is at a reduced rate that was agreed upon previously last year because it is a tribal deal, and the BIA, we gave them a reduced rate before, so we agreed to give these guys a reduced rate as well. So are there any questions on it?
I don't see a reason to say no.
I'll move it.
I'll second the motion by Radig. Discussion or questions?
Is this got a termination date, or is it just a thing?
No, that's what I like about these. These contracts just continue to roll. Us or them have to cancel them, so it doesn't require us any manpower to redraft contracts every year and that. So something less to think about every year.
Tells me why I didn't find it.
Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 12 for Emergency Services Director Gary Brown for action is consideration and or approval for Emergency Services to hire 2 full-time operations officers, paramedics, and 1 3/4 part-time operations officer by January 2nd, 2018 or earlier. This is coming back. Mr. Gary Brown.
Thank you. Good evening. Just to recap kind of the situation for the people who maybe haven't been tracking quite as well as others. Siouxland Paramedics, who has been the contract 911 provider for the city of Sioux City for almost 30 years, I think, notified the city of Sioux City earlier this year that they would no longer be providing 911 services. First, I'd like to just tell you that Siouxland Paramedics has done an outstanding job over that period of time, and I believe they've been in good faith trying to work with us to find some solutions since their announcement, as they have been with everybody in the tri-state area. All of us, even though Siouxland Paramedics was Sioux City's contract ambulance provider, all of us relied on them for, in the case of Woodbury County, they do our medical examiner cases, they do our non-emergency jail transfers, and they also do the SWAT team. They've got a special team that works with the SWAT team when they're deployed, as well as providing paramedic assists. A few years back, I approached the board about adding some paramedics to my department, and you granted me one position. We placed that paramedic on daytimes, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday through Friday one week and Monday through Thursday on the opposite week, just so we'd fit within their 207K plan on hours. After 7 o'clock at night and weekends, we don't have a paramedic on my department. As I've talked to the board in the past, our goal is, and even in our long-range planning that we did a few years back, was to increase the size of our staff to, from a safety standpoint, to have 2 people on the squad and to be able to provide a higher level of care. Basically what you have is you have some of the communities in Woodbury County are what we call provisional paramedic services. Danbury, for example, Bob Welty is a paramedic with Danbury, and when he's at home, he's also the director of Siouxland Paramedics. They can operate as a paramedic service. Salic, Sergeant Bluff, Lawton are all communities that have paramedics, and when they're available, the service can operate at the paramedic level. However, we still interface with them both for manpower and for ACL or advanced life support, because there are times their paramedics are volunteers, they work full-time in the business, and there are times when they're just not available. With Siouxland Paramedics, Denny and I believe you met with them or talked to them over the last couple of weeks about providing a service to the county under a contract price, so much per call or so much per year, to continue to do paramedic assists with us. And I believe the answer you got, Denny, was they're not interested in providing that service.
Correct.
So it really leaves really leaves a big void. After 7 o'clock at night and on weekends, or if our paramedics on vacation or off sick, it leaves a huge void. We feel like right now we're covering about 98% of the calls that need a paramedic with a paramedic between us and Siouxland Paramedics. On January 1st, that other component, Siouxland Paramedics, will go away. What we're requesting to do, and we know it's in the mid-year budget issue, is to hire 2 full-time and 1 3/4-time paramedics to get us to the point where we can operate and try to achieve that 98% paramedic available for the cases that need them. We automatically respond on nearly every EMS call. The squad makes it a determination if they get there first, or if they've got a paramedic available, then they'll turn us around and send us back. If they make the determination that we're not needed, we're sent back to quarters, which makes us available for the next call. So we're not wasting fuel, time, and resources going someplace we're not needed, but we're also not delaying that response, waiting for somebody to get on the scene to make that decision. It's about from Danbury, Iowa to Mercy Medical Center, it's about 58-minute transport time. So you're in the back of an ambulance with a patient for nearly, on a good day, about an hour. Cushing, it's 47 minutes, 48 minutes. Odo, Anthem down in that area, it's another 46, 47 minutes. So not having ALS care available for those outlying communities, we feel will set EMS back 30 to 35 years. There's a lot that the EMTs that are on the volunteer ambulance services can do. There's an enormous skill set there. We have a highly trained, highly competent group of volunteers across this county, and I would let any of them take care of any member of my family or myself. But it's that skill set that's needed on about 30% of the patients, where we can make a difference in their life and sustain life, or bring them back, that these paramedics are instrumental in providing for them. We've come a long ways in 30 years. We do all kinds of stuff in the field now that we never dreamed we'd be able to do 30 years ago. And we have a high level of success with those skill sets, even in the unincorporated area where We have long times to get to the patient and a long transport time. So right now, what we're asking for is for the board to approve these positions mid-year, which is about $100,000. And then that would really kind of set us up for the commitment to continue to provide them starting, after July 1st to provide that service at a cost of about $200,000 annually. Right now, there's about $40,000 already in tax asking for Siouxland paramedics subsidy that we give them every year, which we wouldn't be doing after this subsidy that's on these books. So that tax asking could be made available to offset some of that $200,000 cost. So it brings it down to about $160,000 of new tax asking starting July 1st to run this service. But unfortunately, EMS in Iowa is not mandated by any level of government. So we feel like Woodbury County and the communities have a great working relationship and a shared relationship. The communities really wouldn't have to take their ambulance outside of the city limits of their community. If they didn't, then Woodbury County would have to have a transporting vehicle available to transport patients in the unincorporated area. The way we work it is they come out with their ambulance and do the transports, and we provide higher level of care and manpower and equipment to help them out. So it's a good trade-off back and forth, and we're seeing this model kind of come out more and more across the United States as time goes on, because EMS is really just, it's time for it to be looked at as an essential service, just like fire and police. It's not a money-making proposition. We can bill for some of our costs, but it comes in way short of what the actual cost to provide the service is. And with that, I'll stop and take any questions board members may have.
This is essentially a $200,000 improvement request due to the timing of Siouxland paramedics pulling out when they did before our budget cycle. We have this balance, as you know, with incentivizing the growth of the volunteer squads, which we desperately need. Now the communities and the county taking on that sort of central administrative role of paramedics. The board did grant in the past part of an improvement request in this regard. You were attempting to stage in this improvement. I asked you earlier if you would perhaps recommend to the board a second option where this would be staged in, and you mentioned you couldn't recommend that. You believe this level is where we should be at, but that's a hurdle for me. Is the great increase in taxes at this point?
And speaking to that, Mr. Chairman, the question you asked me is could we do with less people between now and July 1st? The problem with that is then I got to pick the hours and the time of day when that ALS, that advanced life support care, is not available. And I can tell you from, we do CQI, or continuous quality improvement, on every call we go on. We read every report, multiples of us in the department, and you cannot pick the time of day or the day of the week that you either need ALS care or you don't. It's physically impossible. We have traumas in the middle of the night. We have heart attacks in the middle of the night. We have them on weekends. And the manpower situation for the volunteer squads really is no better on the weekends than it is during the weekday, because they're all got families. They've got activities, and we've got communities that rely on 3 or 4 EMTs to support that whole service. And they have to juggle the schedule around so that there's just one of them in town to be able to have the ambulance available. So, there's people that just flat don't go places because they're on call for their community for that weekend. So,
Mr. Taylor.
What do other counties, obviously we're not alone in trying to solve this conundrum. What do other counties do across the board? Certainly we would be hard pressed to find 24/7 paramedic coverage in other counties. Would you say we would be an outlier rather than the norm?
No, not actually. Plymouth County, Cherokee County, and Monona County, through the hospitals, all have 24/7 24/7 coverage for paramedics.
But that's funded through the hospitals and not through the respective counties, correct?
Well, I'm not exactly sure how they're all funded, but I know that in some cases, like in Plymouth County's case, they contribute to EMS up there as well. But, the bottom line is if you don't have good EMS, just like good law enforcement or good fire, who's going to want to live in our county or build a business or expand, in your county? It really does become a part of the economic development engine of a community, those services, just like the ISO rating is for fire departments. The better the ISO rating, the cheaper insurance, the more it saves people money. But, the bottom line with EMS is it's only about 40 years old. It's only been around about 40 years in Iowa. It is nowhere in the books is it required to be provided. No one has to provide it. And we have been working legislatively for several years to try to come up with a consensus to bring forward to the legislature. We believe EMS should be an essential service, and it should be funded just like fire and police. It is a partner service to those, and to expect EMS to try to pay their bills and run off of subsidies that every year get less, and more people don't have the ability to pay. It really becomes, if you can pre-certify every EMS call, you can make money on it, but you can't do that, not in the 911 business. And we just feel, and we have the support of the County EMS Association, which makes up all of the services in the county. Our medical director, Dr. Caldwell, is very concerned about where we're going with this and making sure that we can continue to provide ALS care. We feel like we've done a good job of networking with the other providers in the area to look at what options they're exercising. We've had nonstop conversations with Siouxland Paramedics and Sioux City Fire. So,
my one other question. Thank you very much, and I want to be supportive of this. I also have the heartburn about the taxes in the middle of the year and the bridge too far, as far as maybe the full coverage of it. But you mentioned $40,000 from SBI. Is that money that they are not counting on that we otherwise would have contributed that we can truly realize in this thing, or did I misunderstand?
No, I'm talking about July 1st. Right now, we have to build into the tax asking that $40,000.
Okay.
So if that is already built into the tax asking when we get to July 1st, that could be incorporated in this $200,000 for the paramedics. So really,
that's money that they're not expecting them
next
got
year.
Got
so
it.
It's built into the tax asking. So now you're at a $160,000 request after the 1st of July.
Okay.
But the budget amendment for the approximately $100,000 would still trigger the next fiscal year's increase. Is that correct? Yeah. So it's there's two numbers, but they're taken together.
What's one position cost? I mean, I can do the math, but my calculator isn't working.
Looking at about $73,000.
Thank you.
I have a hard time supporting this kind of a mid-year deal, and I get the situation. But I also get, when people choose to live out in the county, they also kind of choose the services they're receiving. And, I mean, EMS from the county, how long has the emergency department here been around in the county budget? Is it?
My department?
Correct.
I've been here 35 years.
35 years. And then how extensive has the ambulance service been from the county in those 35 years?
The county's never provided an ambulance service. We provide what's called a tiered or EMS first response. So we don't actually transport the patients. We rely on the volunteer squads to transport the patients. And unfortunately for us, they're willing to come into the unincorporated area of the county and do that for us. Otherwise, the county would find themselves in a position, and we've looked at it, and we've looked at the bare minimum you would need to cover just the unincorporated area of Woodbury County. You're talking 3 rigs, staffing and housing, $800,000 annually per. That doesn't include any capital improvement or your initial startup costs. That's your staff, your housing and benefits and fuel and that kind of thing. So you're talking $800,000 times 3. And that's minimum. There's times in this county that we have 5 or 6 ambulances on the street at one time. It's a way busier system than what people recognize. In Sioux City, you see it on the news all the time, but out in the county, we're out there all the time doing this and very little news coverage of it. So, you know, and I understand, you know, in my defense, I feel like if I've been trying to build these positions, it was in my long-range plan. We all kind of saw this day coming. We've been talking about it for a long time. And I really would hate to see us on January 1st not have ALS coverage available for 911 calls. I think that would be setting the system back 35 years. I think the towns are putting their best foot forward, and I think they've got a lot in the game. Those ambulances are $160,000, $180,000 a piece, plus insurance, plus staffing, plus housing, and we're able to use those out in the unincorporated area. They're able to use us in the cities. I got the whole thing with the mid-budget year thing. Believe me, I've never come in mid-budget year and asked for an increase in my budget in over 30 years of managing my department, and I've never come in over budget. So, but this, I truly believe is the right thing to do, and without it, I think you're going to see the consequences brought forward on a regular basis. When we have a call in the middle of the night or on the weekends when we don't have a paramedic, I think people are it's quickly going to draw attention.
You know, and even our county guide says, you know, first thing to consider, emergency response times, sheriff, fire suppression, medical care cannot be guaranteed. Under some extreme conditions, you may find that emergency response takes longer than you might expect.
What are you reading from?
The Woodbury County Guide to Country Living.
Okay.
That's the first thing in our, oh, I died.
You know, I've worked with Woodbury County, and I don't know that I've read the guide for county living.
Just reminding you.
I've never read it. We live in a...
You made a comment earlier about EMS should be considered part of public safety. And I really think that's true, because when you think of first responders, you don't rule out ambulance and EMS. When you say public safety, they seem to be forgotten part of it. But.
Yeah, EMS, there is a move afoot over in Eastern Iowa right now, and it's spreading to get EMS as an essential service. They stopped short at that point of fixing the funding mechanism and the governance structure. The talk is pretty much is that this should be laid at the foot of the Board of Supervisors to assure that EMS is being provided within the counties, because that's the organization has the ability to impact a countywide operation. And I think you're going to see, I'm positive you're going to see a piece of legislation put forward this year to make EMS an essential service, and probably to require the Board of Supervisors, not that they have to do it, but to make sure it's being provided.
How many EMS vehicles do we have currently?
We have 2 1-ton and then my Suburban. Yeah.
SPI could have made this a lot easier if they waited till July 1st.
I know.
They were incentivized significantly to try to get them to wait till July 1st.
I know our county made the decision to keep services and the legally required commission separate. You know, that is a mechanism that has the power to tax. The mayors of these rural communities have much outsized voting power compared to any the board, supervisors, or anyone else. Are you aware of other counties that are looking at, and I'm not saying we should, because I realize that we made that decision, but are you aware of other counties that are using that power, where the rural community is saying this is something we are going to get ahead of and we are going to champion instead of?
I think emergency managers in general across the state are involved in the conversation about EMS. I don't know that the commissions want, like in the case when we formed the Woodbury County Commission, want to take on that role, because it's outside of the scope of what they're mandated by law to provide, and it does come with some liability. It comes with some issues associated with when you employ people in this business and when you're doing medical procedures. I cannot think of an emergency management commission in the state right now, and I may not be correct, but I can't think of one being around it for as long as I was, that's doing an EMS function like what we do. They've got, inside of emergency management is occasionally an EMS coordinator. It helps with grants and it helps with coordination of districts and communications and that kind of thing. But no, I can't.
So certainly your counterparts in several counties might be under that authority.
Yeah. You're seeing EMS being built out more and more at the county level across the state. As you with Isaac and I forget now whether it was Butler or Buchanan, one of the counties, I think I've had 5 counties call me this year looking at our model and wanting our budget numbers and how we do things and our protocols and everything, and we've provided everything we've got to them. So everybody that's asked for anything we've asked for, we've given it to them.
I'll offer a motion, and if people like it or don't like it, you can vote it up or down, I guess.
One thing I do want to bring up is maybe in the future, we look at having the referendum on an EMS levy countywide, maybe this next election cycle, look at maybe a 12.5 cent or 18 cent capped EMS levy that...
Okay. There's 2, can I speak to that?
Sure.
There's 2 counties in the state using the EMS, the surtax for EMS. And I think the last time Denny and I put the numbers together on it, it generated about $170,000 a year for Woodbury County. That's my memory. It has to be revoted on every 5 years. I would say that it would have about as much of a chance of passing because it's an income surtax, which also has to compete with any school districts that have an income surtax on, as you would have on funding a new jail through a referendum. I don't think it would pass. I quite honestly
thought it was a property tax levy, wasn't it?
No. There's only one option as far as a voted tax, and that's that income surtax.
Or the Cornhuskers winning the Big Ten.
What's that?
Yeah.
No,
I don't think you'd ever get a referendum to fund, nor do I believe that, I believe EMS is an essential service and should be funded. Just like we do secondary roads and county attorney and all the other services that we provide.
Back to Mr. Taylor.
So I'll offer a motion to add, and I know this doesn't get you where you want to go, but to add a single FTE as of January 1st at a cost of $36,500. I know you have to pick when you don't have coverage. I know currently there are a lot of other counties, I assume, that have to make those decisions and would look to your expertise between Danbury, Salix, Sergeant Bluff, Anthem, you know, and when those times would be and when it would be most applicable. And then in the future, the $40,000 from SBI would cover at least a portion of that $73,000. And then maybe during the budgeting cycle, maybe there's a stair step to looking at adding in the future. I'm not comfortable going further or more than that mid-year, because whatever we do tonight is, we all know, is a vote to fund these for the future. There's no way we're going to fund these at 2 3/4 and then do anything but.
Does your motion specify a funding source?
No, it does not.
Is there a second? I'll second. Recommendation, Dennis?
We got 3 different options. One would be use some gaming revenue. Another one would be interest excess that we're gaining from, you know, interest rates going up out of the general basic fund, which would move money from general basic to general sup. The last one, maybe not the most desirable, is local option sales tax, because Gary did bring up the economic impact of not having service out there. Now, that's debatable both ways. But I checked with the treasurer, and possibly we can get $40,000 from interest this year. Then maybe to offset the, well, that'd offset the $36,000 for 6 months.
What would have happened to that interest anyway? Where would that otherwise have gone?
Otherwise, it'd go into your cash reserves. Now, you could use gaming revenue, because that'd be one time. That's $36,000. That's an option. Or use a portion and split this up into different funding mechanisms. You go 10, 10, 10.
I'm not a big fan of using gaming for personnel. I know we're talking about a one-time expense, but.
PJ, any Any guidance on local option sales tax for economic development applying to emergency services?
Not at this point, I don't. I've not looked at that issue, so I'm not educated enough to give a response.
Yes, Mr. Gillette.
I like the idea of adding 2 3/4. I like the idea of adding 15 3/4 EMS paramedics out there, but the fact remains we can't be everywhere all the time. I mean, that's the same thing with law enforcement, same with our fire. They can't prevent everything. They're reactionary only. But like I said, this is just expensive. And it's not that I don't want it. I'm just not liking it in the middle of the tax year, and we're still not sure how we're going to fund it. So, I mean, is it going to get to a point where someday we're going to want one of these stations, you know, just full-time staff at every town? You know, I'd love it if all the towns could have 6 or 8 people that do this exact same thing. And to Mr. Chairman's point, it almost seems like we're taking some of the stress off the cities, which I get because it's a non-revenue raising entity, but I still don't, there's just no guarantees on everything working right and saving every life that goes untoward accident, heart attack, whatever. I'm just not convinced that we can't do it all.
These 2 3/4 positions would not get us to be everywhere every time we're needed.
Nor would 20.
Nor would 20.
So,
but the proposal I'm putting forward is what I truly believe as a professional in EMS is needed in order to replace the void that Siouxland Paramedics is leaving behind and maintain the level of care that we're currently able to provide today to the citizens of Woodbury County. To not follow this recommendation would step us back. When that paramedic's not on, it would take us back 30 to 35 years at EMS. You know, and I guess I feel a little bit, I had offers from other EMS providers to join me tonight and from our medical director and stuff, and I've always believed that do your research, put the proposal in front of you, but I mean, I don't know if it would make any difference if the board heard from some of the providers out there on how this system works. I'd be more than happy to schedule a time for those folks to come in so you can hear what they've got to say about this.
well, part of my point, and excuse me for interrupting you, but you just got done saying that all these towns are getting better and better services out there. So I'm not arguing, I just struggle to think that it really would be setting back 30 to 35 years, like you say, because certainly our local volunteer, our VFDs, didn't have the skills or the equipment they had then as they do now. So I'm just not seeing the 50-50 split there. I'm not seeing where you're...
When I talk about their skill sets, there's tasks that we've been able to add to our skill sets that makes us able to care for patients better.
Sure.
Across the board.
Sure.
And when you get to the paramedic level of care, there are so many more things that you can do for a patient to save the life, to sustain life, to make the patient comfortable for that 55 or 60-minute ride to the hospital at that level of care. And right now, that's what we have. We have about 98% of the time we're able to provide to citizens of Woodbury County that paramedic level of care. With Siouxland Paramedics doing what they did, that took us back away from that 98% of the time, and it creates an environment now where that level of care, the drug therapy, the advanced airway, the ability to cardiovert, to take somebody's heart that's either running too fast and slow it down, or if it's not going fast enough to speed it up so it can perfuse, all of that goes away when a paramedic's not available, along with a whole bunch of other things that...
Well, Siouxland Paramedics is bowing out because there's no money.
That's
or there's no money. And, I mean, at a certain point, it just comes, it seems to me that the county is going to get to a level where we can't tax anymore. We just can't fund every possible thing that comes down the pipe. And as much as I like the EMS and being ready for every instance that happens, it ain't gonna.
This doesn't get us ready for every instance that could happen. This gets us to where we're maintaining the level of care that we're doing today. And there are calls today that we don't have a paramedic for if they're all already busy. I mean, there's just so much resources that you can put on the table and staff at one time. There's only just so many resources. And what we do is we try to prioritize, based on the calls as they come in, what resource goes to which call. And sometimes we're criticized for that, but that's a call that we make through protocols and through supervision.
Are paramedics liable medically for any, misdiagnosis or misadministration of drugs?
Paramedics don't diagnose, but we do treat, we do use drugs, they do use drugs, and they're required to follow a set of standard protocols because they're actually working under a physician's license. We're working under a doctor's license. Everything that we do, whether you're a basic EMT, advanced EMT, or paramedic, you're using.
But is there a potential for
Absolutely.
to get sued?
They'd be insured for that, though, wouldn't they?
Absolutely. It doesn't happen very often, but yes, you've got the liability of someone. Anybody can bring a lawsuit against any of us for anything. So, yes. In my 35 years, I've had one lawsuit brought against my department, and that was over a flood. We won, but they still sued. Still cost us a lot of money to defend it.
All that said previously, does one FTE help? And if it does, how would you fit that into your schedule rotation?
Well, our challenge is still daytime for the volunteers. It's better at night, but as far as manpower goes, when I look at it from a manpower perspective, I would probably apply that resource as much as possible during daytime hours, daytimes and weekends. That still leaves us nights. I can't give you specific locations and stuff, but in the last 5 days, we've had cases consistently after 7 o'clock at night when our paramedics off, including flying patients in with them. We use the helicopter every chance we get when we need them. We call for civilian paramedics when we need them. We've got a good working relationship with some of the outlying hospitals around us. When we're up in their neighborhood, if we don't have a paramedic, we try to get one from them. So, so we're resourceful, but I just have to plead the case for my patients and for my volunteer squads that we really don't want to step back. We know it's miserable coming in the middle of a budget year. We wanted to avoid that. We've been trying to beef this staff up to get to this point. So it's not that we haven't asked and that we were incompetent by not asking, so we've been here. We knew this day was coming. Unfortunately, civilian paramedics just made the decision, and we can't blame, nobody can blame them for what they did. When you're losing the kind of money they're losing, you can't blame them. We're fortunate that they are going to stay in business and be able to do medical examiner transfers and stuff like that for us. Otherwise, we'd be in real tough shape there. We'd be looking at contracting with a funeral home. We're trying to find a funeral home that'll run all over and do medical examiner cases.
The private sector did a wonderful job, and the reality is it shifts to the public entities like this, and there's this conversation.
For years we've been talking about what a benefit civilian paramedics has been to the community, and they haven't. And our hats go off to the men and women that have run that organization and worked there, so they're good people.
It's probably prudent to identify a funding source.
Interest from...
Going back to that, Jeremy is right. We haven't used gaming revenues for one-time expenses for operating. The interest is a good possibility. Local option sales tax we have used for planning, zoning, economic development, and soil conservation. Operating cost salaries there. So
I'll move it from local option sales tax with a caveat that if the county attorney's office objects, then interest would be the secondary funding source.
I'm agreeable to that amendment to the motion from Taylor. Discussion. Roll call, please.
Nay.
No.
Ready?
No.
Taylor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion fails 2-3 with DeWitt, Potabom, and Radig opposed. Mr. Auditor, would you recommend, if the board does not take action, a motion to postpone, or is that motion sufficient for this item?
You've taken care of this item, and any other proposal would come back, we can do that at a later time.
Okay. Are there any other motions then?
I would make a motion that we follow Mr. Brown's recommendation and go with 2 FT and 1 3/4.
Is there a funding source specified in the motion?
No, because I'm going to have to do some research with Dennis to try to find one.
I'd be amenable if we can get this done without raising taxes. I mean, if we magically had this kind of money out of interest or whatever that would also replenish itself, but at the same time, we're sitting here looking at.
Mr. Chairperson.
Yes, is there a second so we can vote on this, please? I'll second. Continue your discussion.
Like I said, because it's not going to be too much longer, we're going to be looking at staff in the jail. We put that off. We put off the, we don't want to call it the improvements to the jail that are needed. And in light that we're going to need more staff to support that improvement. So we're already looking at adding, 8 people for that?
Hearing no further discussion on this topic, roll call vote, please.
DeWitt?
Nay.
Potabom?
Aye.
Raddick?
No.
Taylor?
No.
Oh.
Nay. Motion fails 1-4. Taylor, DeWitt, Raddick, and myself opposed.
Direction?
We'll have to look at it in the budget year, I think.
I'm amenable to looking at it with fresh eyes and with a way to pay for it. We got more time to think about it and look at it. But just sitting here in the middle of the year, I struggle with that, Gary.
I totally understand, but I just got to tell you, I think it's the worst thing we could do for patient care in Woodbury County. There's a lot of reasons to fund things. In my opinion, my taxes have gone up $80,000 on a house that I bought 6 years ago, and I don't mind paying for public safety, and I don't think most people do. And I'm just going to tell you, from a professional EMS provider's perspective, this is setting EMS back 35 years, and we're going to have patients that aren't going to get the level of care, and the outcomes are going to be horrible. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 13, for action from the Board of Supervisors, myself and Supervisor Taylor, is approval of a response letter to the Taxpayers Research Council. The board will discuss first, and then we'll open it up for Mr. Taylor Goodwin if you'd like to comment, or members of the public. We were delivered this letter by Mr. Taylor Goodwin by email to the 5 members of the board. Obviously, the 5 members of the board cannot reply all. So we think, by we I mean Supervisor Taylor and myself, believe that it is prudent to respond in this format. Several of the assertions behind the questions, certainly not contentious, but we believe, as we say in the letter, errant. And so this letter gives us the opportunity as a board to address the issue in depth, which we have not done to this point, on several issues regarding taxation, regarding sustainability, and to kind of push back against the false understanding, if it exists anywhere in the community, that staying with Sioux Rivers means no tax increase. That is absolutely false. As we say, it's clear that a move to Rolling Hills actually represents a neutral, if not positive, benefit to Woodbury County taxpayers. Mr. Taylor, I'll turn it over to you at this point.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's in the backup material, so short of reading the TRC's letter and then reading our letter, which I think would be rather long, but I think just the assertions, just to review maybe 3 or 4. The first one from the TRC to the full board, and I do concur with the chair that it wouldn't be fair to respond as we have individually when asked individual questions. I think I've had 6 emails from Mr. Goodwin, the executive director, that I responded to within a couple of hours. It's different, and I don't think it's appropriate if I respond, because Supervisor Potabom or Radig could say, well, who are you to speak for the board? So that's what we'll be asking for tonight, is support for a motion signifying the chair to sign. So first off, it was, we do pay $17.58 per capita currently in Sioux Rivers, and the max is $30.41, I believe we actually have from the Department of Management. Dennis?
That's the numbers and floating around. I did get the numbers from the Department of Management. It's actually 30.49.
Thank you very much. And so it's asserted that we will go to 32.67 in Rolling Hills. That's not true. If you ask Rolling Hills or look at, they are programmed at 28.50. We are certain, and the letter contains this, that Sioux Rivers is going to run a negative $400,000 balance. That's from projections that our budget analyst has on paper that he has received even from Sioux Rivers region. So Sioux Rivers is very soon going to be at their max levy anyway. The FY18 per capita in Rolling Hills isn't what is to come. It is $28.50. In fact, it's $28.50 the year after that as well. And so one of the questions that the TRC asked is, why not request a state audit? An audit has come back. It was an adverse opinion, but that's more because of the type of audit, in all fairness. But it doesn't take any audit to recognize the poor budgeting practices that have gone on in Sioux Rivers region. The fact that they set a levy at $17.58 was recertified by Plymouth County. And then it was asked retroactively and said it can be no other for the Sioux Rivers Region Governance Board if you want equity and equality, because they've already recertified at the staff recommendation of the CEO. So that was one thing that we would have answered if it wasn't for doing so formally right now and correcting some of those things. The second assertion in the TRC's letter is that Woodbury County is costing the region more than $1 million more than they are currently paying in, and we take some issue with that assertion because there's a mixture, an admixture of one-time funding with ongoing expenses. You've often heard this: put in 60, get out 63%, or only put in 63% and get out 73%. Well, that includes all staff in their calculations. That doesn't include the last 2 years where Woodbury County has actually funded, without equity, Plymouth County in particular. And so the other assertion was, will you be confident that they'll want to take on this financial burden and increase their total region-wide population and increase their maximum per capita levy? It doesn't. If it's $28.50 for the next year, and it's $28.50 for the year after, and it's programmed that way, and Woodbury County stays within its services, that it would be costing at $28.50. That's just not the case. And then finally, the letter asserts regarding the roughly $3 million currently in Sioux Rivers reserves. There is no $3 million in Sioux Rivers reserves. In fact, we're going to see, if we are programmed at the 1758, then 2258, you're going to see a negative reserve balance. So I'm not sure where that figure was received. And then if Sioux Rivers dissolves, we have heard, and no source cited, that Woodbury County seeks to use this money to reduce future levies and future agreements, and what deals have been discussed or proposed by Woodbury County to other regions. Well, there's only one region that is engaged in discussions. We made very clear Rolling Hills' stipulations for going in. There have been no other deals other than to make sure that we would agree to their stipulations that were laid out in, I think, a very transparent way. So that is the crux of our response. We do anticipate a $700,000 to $1.1 million availability potentially. Whether that would be used in Sioux Rivers or whether that would be used in Rolling Hills would be used to fund 3 months' worth of expenses and any buy down of levy that would be a potential. That won't exist, I don't believe, in Sioux Rivers in the future years. So that's really the crux of our response, and believe it or not, that was shorter than reading it verbatim.
I would add that I think it's high time for our board to respond to some of the pervasive misinformation that we laid out in this letter, that not necessarily from the TRC, but certainly circulating in the public. Board members' comments. I hope you all had a chance to read it. Hearing no comments from board members, Mr. Goodvin.
Hello, Board. Taylor Goodvin, Director of Taxpayers Research Council. Worked at the TRC for almost 3 years now. This is kind of a common practice for us. We send these little letters out. I've been told to tell you that we have never received such a hostile letter to simple questions, and I know the language can be read as asserting, but we were simply just repeating what we were told by Sioux Rivers. As a board, we never intended to go to Sioux Rivers, make this public without going to Woodbury County. We chose to do the region first. We thought with the proximity to you guys, getting answers from you would be much easier, so let's get answers from the region, clear it up with the county, go back to the region if need be. And I think we're doing our job here. We're getting things in paper that were previously not on paper. We asked 3 or 4 questions. We got a 4-page response. I think that's a good thing. The assertions being made in there are not being made by us. They're not using numbers that we provided. We are using numbers we were provided. I will also say, and I know it's not in front of you because I just received it here, Shane Walters, the CEO of Sioux Rivers, responded to this letter upon his approval, which I don't see a problem with. I'll send it to you, but he says these numbers that he originally gave us are correct. So there's a problem somewhere, and I think that's the TRC's job, is to find out where. I'll clear up a couple things in here. Nathan Vanderplatz is no longer a member of the TRC. I have about 30 letterhead that are updated. I put it on the wrong one. He's been off the board for about a year now. So when he spoke a couple weeks ago, he was not a member of the TRC. Also, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to clear that up before we start here, and I won't take too much time. Just based on the projections that I talked to Dennis with this afternoon, what kind of spending increases is that based on? Is that based on a 2% spending increase? Is it based on spending staying the same? Just I was curious on how we did that.
I'm not sure I understand your question. As far as spending staying the same, you're talking about the total.
We were given the projected fiscal year 19, fiscal year 20 levy rates. Is that based on spending staying the same? Is it based on an increased spending?
Are you talking Sioux Rivers region?
Both. We were given numbers for both.
This is the Sioux Rivers region chart that was given to us.
And those numbers are different than what they gave us 2 weeks ago?
We don't know what they gave you 2 weeks ago because we weren't provided with.
It was in, we have that.
I've never gotten the same numbers twice from the region, so I can tell you.
We have a 3-year plan that has a 2258 levy in FY19, a 2833 levy in FY20.
That will reflect on this sheet. And then you can see here it shows negative fund balances, which will make us insolvent.
And I have from Shane that they do not have a $400,000 in insolvency. So we're not getting into this right now, but there's a problem between here and here. This is from Shane right here.
Right, and that's respectfully, that's why when I saw this letter, I gave a call to you and had asked for that dialogue short of this to be able to say, this is what we're seeing at that 2258 is a negative $400,000 balance. And obviously there's a divergence of opinion between our budget analyst, the fiscal agent of Sioux Rivers region, and the CEO, CFO. We do assert in the letter, and I know you've since clarified this a little bit, which I appreciate. When I said, please allow us the opportunity to show you what we're seeing.
It was never our intention to not allow the opportunity.
Right, but your response at that time was, we believe the CEO and CFO are just as good a source.
Please, let's have some order in this discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, so our hope is that you take a look at what we and our fiscal agent are looking at for Sioux Rivers and their solvency, and that you'd look at what Rolling Hills has projected for next year, not this current year, and just compare those. And clearly there's a divergence, and welcome the TRC to say we're wrong, or we're right, or this is why there is that disconnect between the numbers.
And I think we're in no position as a board right now to say who's wrong or right. We just wanted to get it in writing. And I was fearful that if you called and told me you would leave it out of the writing, therefore Sioux Rivers would never see it, or my board. And I know we had the talk on Friday that it's just much easier for me to correctly disseminate information if it's in writing directly from the person giving it to me. I don't get how we can have two numbers from the same person saying different things. And I know that's not your guys' fault. We're not saying it is. But I think if my board was here and we just had our meeting this afternoon, I think we moved fast here. And I know it's a very complex issue, and it goes much more beyond this letter. But we just wanted to get our point across in writing. We never intended our original questions with those numbers from the region to go public. We understand that you have to put it in the packet, but we sent it to the Journal. I told the Journal to hold off. I just wanted to get it to them so I didn't forget to get it to them. And we were going to hear back from you guys, then hopefully hear back from the region, which we have. So I think we're creating dialogue that would otherwise not be happening. So I think the TRC is doing what we need to do. It's not in our interest to disseminate incorrect information, and I don't think we have. So we'll see where it goes. I just wanted to come here to clear up any. We weren't trying to undermine anyone or spread wrong information. We were not taking these numbers to ungospel. That's why we didn't come out with any position based on them. So.
Were you finished?
Yeah, go ahead.
I totally agree. The dialogue is helpful overall. Typically, when something gets sent to the Journal, it is going to be public at some point. Just my opinion.
And I'll just respond to that real quick. I told him not to do anything with it. The person I sent, I have a pretty good relationship with. I knew he wouldn't do anything with it. We got a dialogue going, and I think that was our goal from the beginning. That's all we wanted to do. So thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd move approval of the letter.
Second.
Second by Taylor. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Therefore, it speaks for the board. Item 14 for action from the Board of Supervisors and myself is approval of the resolution to join the Rolling Hills Community Services Region. I would like to read the resolution. It is relatively brief. Whereas on October 3rd, the Woodbury County Board of Supervisors approved a resolution to withdraw from the Sioux Rivers Regional Mental Health and Disability Services, and thereafter gave written notice to the Sioux Rivers Regional Mental Health Disability Services of its intent to withdraw. Whereas on October 10th, the Woodbury County Board voted to enter into discussions with the Rolling Hills region regarding the possibility of Woodbury County joining the Rolling Hills region. And whereas Woodbury County appreciates the positive and productive discussions with the Rolling Hills region and the Iowa Department of Human Services regarding the potential for Woodbury County to join the Rolling Hills region, and is committed to continuing to work cooperatively with the Rolling Hills region to effectuate the proposed joinder. And whereas Woodbury County desires to join the Rolling Hills region as of July 1st, 2018, now therefore be it resolved that 1, Woodbury County hereby makes a written request to the Rolling Hills region to become a member county of the Rolling Hills region. 2, Woodbury County agrees to abide by the terms of the 28E agreement of the Rolling Hills region and has the legal power and authority to do so under applicable law. 3, the chairman of the Woodbury County Board is authorized to execute the 2080 agreement of the Rolling Hills region on behalf of Woodbury County and take all other necessary and appropriate action to allow Woodbury County to become a member of the Rolling Hills region, including but not limited to appointing one member of the Board of Supervisors to represent Woodbury County on the Rolling Hills region governing board, so dated today. Also included in the backup is a November 1st letter from Siouxland Mental Health Center, signed by the Board of Directors President. It's significant, I believe, to come from such a high level of the organization. We're faced with a question as a board: does it matter what our largest mental health provider in the county and in Sioux Rivers region, does it matter what they think? I think it does. Unfortunately, and for whatever reason, the public discourse has certainly not included their input in contrast to other sources. And it's covered in the previous item, but it's relevant to the discussion in the letter and in the previous discussions of the region about the relationship with the providers. It was embarrassing and I really appreciate knowing he's not affiliated with the TRC anymore, but you can come up here, you can pound the podium, you can say, where is the provider that feels the way Supervisor Taylor said they feel earlier? That's indecent, because as you know, that's how our largest mental health provider feels. And representative of that came up and spoke to our board, said she was terrified, was thanked for her courage to do so, and I do think when you're the only public speaker after a lineup of people on the other side of the issue, you know, it takes some courage to get up and say what you want to say. All of us are used to it, but that was an embarrassing moment, I believe, for our county to have that happen. With that, and anticipating quite a bit of discussion, I move approval of the resolution.
Second.
Second by DeWitt. Discussion from the board.
I just want to, if I may, Mr. Chair, put positively, because a lot of this is, in my estimation, moving on from a relationship that left something to be desired. And I think just looking at Rolling Hills, they're ensuring access to high-quality, value-added, community-based services, their mission statement, strategic plan, having met with their CEO and with Supervisor Radig, engaged Rolling Hills as you all authorized us to do. I'm impressed by their level of knowledge on behalf of the supervisors, as well as many of their major accomplishments. And I note some of them are the solidification of a collaborative spirit between all provider agencies. Does that not sound good, considering what we've gone through during the last 6 weeks? Establishing open lines of communication among providers. I think that's a great thing too, and an implementation of a jail diversion program. And I think a seasoned and mature one at that, from which we can learn much as we have started our own nascent program. So note also the assist training was started and 3 trainings have occurred, and they are engaging their legislature and their representatives. The other thing I noticed, the long-term stable funding. That can get lost in this discussion, but when you certify a per capita at $17.58, and then you short your reserve levels, and then you're going to, against our objection, you're going to have to go back up. That's not, to me, long-term planning. So I do believe, put positively, the cost effectiveness, long-term stability, their management, that I think, and I'd like the opportunity to follow Cherokee County. Cherokee left Sioux Rivers region. Woodbury County is withdrawn to leave Sioux Rivers region. That leaves 2. I think it's time that we get into a healthy and good situation on behalf of those who need mental health services. So those would be my comments.
Other board members?
I was impressed with our meeting with Sioux Rivers, or, going from Sioux Rivers to seeing how that, it was just a kind of informal meeting, and how, just well organized CEO of that region was over in Rolling Hills, and to look at how not too terribly long ago they were a 4-county region, and Cherokee has joined them, Ida County's joined them, Carroll County's joined them. It's because they're doing something right. And that's, I guess, all I really want to say. I was really encouraged with our meeting, and I think it's the right way to go.
Other supervisors?
Well, I'm going to stay where I was all along. I thought we should have stayed where we were and worked things out and worked as a team to better things. But I wasn't one of the two on it, so I wasn't there to see how that got done. I am impressed with how quickly we were able to get approval with Rolling Hills.
I don't believe this signals approval of Rolling Hills. That is the next step.
I guess I was kind of led to believe that they were pretty much willing to accept us.
Well, they had extended the deadline. That's all that they had done.
So I think there's a couple of things for the good of the board as well as the public. Rolling Hills voted 4-2 to waive their November 15th deadline, which means that they can continue to engage past that. That's in their 2080 right now. I believe that they will look to us for some assurances as we work out the withdrawal. Well, we have withdrawn, but we work out some of the ramifications as we leave Sioux Rivers and those funding. So they will have to vote affirmatively, and it will be their boards of supervisors that will have to do so.
Other comments from the board? Is there anyone in the public who would like to address the board?
Will you repeat that, please?
Sorry, is there anyone in the public who would like to address the board?
I'm Dick Owens, 1400 Indian Hills Drive, Sioux City. We are going to hand out, and the only reason we're handing them out is because there's a couple questions I want to ask you. There are providers who are opposing the movement to Rolling Hills, and some of those met yesterday, and some of them signed at the bottom. Some of the people that may be signing in the future were not there, and the conversation is going to continue. But the issue I want to bring up today, as we were talking, first question, is the 28E agreement, is that a contract?
I didn't hear
Two things, please be reminded of our 3-minute limit, and secondly, Mr. Taylor did not hear your question.
28E, is that a contract?
May I respond?
Yes.
Yes.
That's a contract.
Correct.
The question then we looked at is, the second thing is, are you looking at a lawsuit that's been quoted in the paper to be filed against Sioux Rivers to allow the county to voluntarily exit the group?
Mr. Taylor.
No.
So
It
the
is
quote is incorrect.
Right. So the quote, a lawsuit will be filed against Sioux Rivers to allow the county to voluntarily exit the group. Woodbury County has withdrawn from Sioux Rivers region.
This is our question. The next one is, if 28E is a contract, and the reason we brought this is you can look down on the fourth line, the second paragraph. It says, in the event an internal dispute arises amongst or between the governing board, you you shall go through a resolution process.
I would add our actions were not without legal advice. Mr. Taylor.
Woodbury County has engaged in that process previously to no success or avail. Woodbury County, I believe, may, and I will pursue this, may ask for some sort of mediation to make clear withdrawal provisions, which was unsuccessful when we tried to do so through two motions. One, you may remember, was dissolution, and the second one was withdrawal with provisions. Woodbury County was left with no other choice but to simply withdraw because of the November 15th deadline, and has done so. So Woodbury County is no longer a member of the region as of July 1st, 2018.
And at this point, Supervisors, I would advise you that as it pertains to questions that might be implicated in a future lawsuit, that you don't respond to those types of questions.
May I ask one more? Based on what I heard, are you saying then you will go through some kind of mediation and arbitration?
We may do so.
I think that's part of the confusion. When I work with other people, they're confused as you look at 2080 is pretty clear, says exactly what needs to be done. And then we hear, like we've already withdrawn and so forth. There will be additional letters, I'm sure. But tonight, that's what we wanted to find out is if we are truly going to follow 2080.
I would move to receive the letter into the record.
Second.
Second by Potabom.
You had a motion on the floor already.
Oh, thank you.
Can't we pile them up?
What's your recommendation on the timing? Can we receive this at the conclusion of the item?
Right.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? I believe I saw someone in the audience say just vote, so we'll do that. Roll call, please.
I'm confused. Can you repeat the motion?
The motion is to approve the resolution.
All right.
DeWitt?
Aye.
Potabom?
No.
Raddick?
Aye.
Taylor?
Aye.
Oh.
Aye. Motion passes 4-1 with Potabom opposed. We'll now move to receive the letter into the record delivered by Mr. Owens.
Second.
Second by Potabom. Hearing no discussion.
I do have one question. This letter will be made public, is that correct? Because I want people to be able to see the providers.
I'm walking forward to ask for that letter, I guess, at this moment.
What's that?
I'm walking forward to ask for that letter.
Okay, okay.
If we accept it, it has to be made public.
Right, I just want to make sure because I want the public to see the providers or, in one instance, employee of Sioux Rivers.
Okay, very well. Yes, it will be made public in the minutes, as well as the letter from Sioux Mental Health and the backup materials. Hearing no further discussion on receiving, all those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed say nay. Passes 5-0. Thank you. Item 15 is the chairman's report. Very briefly, item A, Simcoe Regional Legislative Committee attended November 2nd. They are putting the finishing touches on the December 1st forum for state elected officials on Simcoe priorities. Iowa certainly has a lot of funding issues coming up with the weak harvest, and so there's a lot of divergence between the different states there on some of their priorities. Item B, Simcoe Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board received a Transportation Improvement Progress Report. The different communities all gave updates. Some of ours had to do with IJR progress. It's going along as well as it can. It's a good partnership between the city and the county for further economic development. There's also going to be a suggested amendment to the bylaws of the Simcoe Board, which will in effect merge the Council of Elected Officials chaired by Councilman Dan Moore with the Simcoe organization chaired by John Winkle. So they thought there was a redundant overlap in those officers, and so the Simcoe Board, if it's approved, and I believe it will be in the November meeting, then there will be simply a Simcoe Board of Directors. Item 16 is reports on committee meetings. Mr. Taylor.
To Mr. Chair, I've asked Kenny Schmitz, Building Services Director, to come back to the board with an assessment of energy usage since January 1st of 2016. So I anticipate that next week. And I think there's some good news to be shared there, as well as a budgetary recommendation for commodities in the future. So that's one thing. And then the other is Siouxland District Health. I had a medical appointment come up, so I was not able to attend, but I met with Kevin today. And their accreditation is going to be next spring for a site visit, and November 21st. And they're going to do their submission of this year. And they're also looking and working with our budget analyst on the health fund. As you may remember, we had a target percentage that we were looking for at 22%, and then a clawback, for lack of a better term, at 20%. And also 5% for health insurance, looking at that. We're going to have to visit at some point about the mechanics of if we lower that, what that does with grant and tax funded employees. So more to come on that. That's all I have.
Mr. DeWitt.
Two things. I was working the other day at the security desk when one of the city employees came in to inspect the water meter. To your point about energy savings, because they thought something was wrong with the water meter, that we're not using water 24/7 like we were in the past. And secondly, I was down at the Les Hills Alliance meeting last week, and it's fascinating. Every time I go down there, there's learning more things about the Les Hills, that they're finding new plants and bugs and trees that I've never heard of that are growing in only one of two places in the world, and Western Iowa is one of them. So just a neat area down there, or all along this bluff here that we live on and probably take for granted that we don't know all the things that are there.
I had the Conservation Board meeting, went really well. We met with representatives of the Winnebago Tribe of Nebraska and Ho-Chunk. The board didn't take an action at that point. They will at a future time. They'll surely assess us then, but it was a good dialogue to get going. Things that were discussed that in a much calmer manner than were discussed here the night they were here. And I think it was a good meeting for everybody involved. And they're going to do a little more in-depth checking before they take an action as a board.
Representatives of the tribe were there?
Yeah, they brought 5 or 6 people. They, including the gentleman who runs their hunting and gaming division over in Nebraska. And, one of the things they tried to dispel as best they could was all the rumors of the golf course, because they said they've got pictures of the proposed golf course. It's been around for years, but that was on land that they already owned, and they had already decided it was way too expensive to build and run one, so they weren't doing it. So if they did it, we assumed they would stick with their original plan. But it was a very good meeting. There was good dialogue both ways, and hopefully they'll come to a decision at their next meeting.
Do you have any predictions on the stance that board will take?
You know, I wouldn't do that at this point because the way the discussion was going, I couldn't read them all, and I would hate to read them and then find out I misread the book. So I'll let them do that when they meet. And their next meeting will be the same evening as our board meeting, so I won't be there. So
we were told they would seek, they would have a position, so it must have been a fruitful discussion.
Yes, it was, and one person wanted to take a position, and several others said no, they want to look a little more into it and make sure that they're as well informed as possible.
Okay.
No official meetings for me. I just want you to know that I represented Woodbury County very well in the south end zone versus Ohio State last week.
Great. With that, item 17, any citizen concerns? Item 18 is board concerns. I want to mention, reached out to Salix for potentially our fourth quarter rural town hall meeting. They have a council meeting coming up and will be getting back to me by the end of the week on either last week in November, first week of December. Of course, try to have as many board members there as possible, so if you want to let me know dates you'll be out, feel free to do so. And also, the board has a history of supporting through gaming revenue, a Christmas luncheon down here for county employees. Looking at dates, I'm open to suggestions, but on our last meeting on December 19th, we are planning to have a 1 p.m. budget review ahead of the start, to get a start on it before next year. If the board would like to have it be done as it has been in the past, where it's been on a Tuesday before the board meeting, then we'd be looking at December 12th. Just an FYI. Any other board concerns? Hearing. Yes.
I think we had someone that missed the citizen concern.
Okay, did we?
My name is Kathy Roberts. I'm not a Woodbury County resident, but I work for Siouxland Mental Health. And I just want to say thank you, Chairman Ung, for recognizing the courage it took. Last time I stood here, I was quite terrified. And I also want to thank Supervisor Taylor and Supervisor Radig for your support at the Sioux Rivers Region meeting. I think you gave some very good information, and I was, I'll use your word, embarrassed at their meeting as well. Not only did they vote against the $675,000 that they had already approved for us, but they also used language like, too bad, so sad, not my problem, and it was very embarrassing and sad at the same time. We also had one of our Friendship House members, and also he's an employee that was there, and stood up to speak, was very, very courageous, which I thought was awesome. And every day since then, he has come to me with some new words of wisdom. And some of that is his humor coming out, and some of it is also that he is still, a week later, thinking of this every day. And some of the things that he has said include things like, if I behaved the way they behaved, a doctor would have me sedated and put away. And then today he told me, he said, Kathy, what do you think would happen if I went to you or someone else at the mental health center with a serious concern, and the answer was, too bad, so sad, not my problem. And I reassured him that that would never happen. And he said he's embarrassed that it did that day. So I just want to say thank you, everybody, for your support. And I really think we're moving in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Hearing no further board concerns, thank you. We are adjourned.
Taylor.
I want you to do the interpretation of a contract.